supposed to play.
Not that one.
What do you mean the slideshow was only supposed to make him look careless? I heard somebody hiss from behind the velvet curtain. Not play the hospital clip. Not that one. I wasn't meant to hear that. Maybe if the ballroom music had been louder, or if the waiter carrying champagne had moved a little faster, or if I hadn't stepped away from table 12 because I suddenly couldn't breathe in a room full of roses and polished silver, maybe I never would have heard my wife's cousin say those words. But I did hear them. And once you hear a sentence like that, on the night your wife has gathered both families, your church friends, your teenage daughter, her business partners, and half the people who have ever politely smiled through your marriage, you don't keep walking like nothing's wrong. You stop, you turn your head slightly, and you realize the evening you thought was going to embarrass you is already slipping out of somebody else's control. My name is Micah Jordan. I'm 42 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed a quiet man could protect a family simply by carrying more than he talked about. You pay the bill before anyone sees the notice. You work the late shift and tell people traffic was bad. You hold your tongue at dinner so your daughter doesn't have to watch her parents tear each other apart between the salad and dessert. You let people misunderstand you if telling the full truth would cost somebody else their dignity. That is the kind of man I had been for 15 years of marriage. It is also the kind of man my wife, Renee, had learned how to use. The anniversary dinner was supposed to celebrate 15 years. That's what the invitation said. 15 years of grace, growth, and commitment. Her wording, not mine. Renee had always been good with wording. Good with soft lighting and clean table settings and captions that sounded humble until you read them twice. She knew how to make a room feel like a testimony. She knew how to smile in a way that made people think they had just witnessed strength, even when all they'd really seen was performance with excellent posture. 2 weeks before that dinner, she had stood in the kitchen of the house we no longer really lived in together and told me, without looking up from her phone, I think it would be good for Ava to see us in one room acting like adults. No scenes, no tension, just dinner. Ava is our daughter, 16, smart enough to hear what people mean when they say less than they should, tender enough to still hope her parents can become the version of themselves they keep promising is in there somewhere. I asked Renee, why now? She shrugged and said, because everybody keeps asking questions. At church, at work, my mother's friends, the Bennetts, everybody. I'm tired of people feeling awkward around us. Let's just have one nice evening and put all of that to bed. All of that. That was Renee's phrase for any living thing she didn't want examined too closely. All of that meant the fact that for 6 months we had been sleeping in separate rooms. All of that meant the rumors she let travel through New Mercy Fellowship that I had become distant, forgetful, impossible to reach. All of that meant the way she had started telling people I was a decent provider, but not the kind of man who remembered what mattered. Anniversaries, birthdays, doctor appointments, important feelings. She said it in ways that sounded sad rather than cruel, and somehow that made it land harder. A woman shaking her head quietly over a husband's failures gets believed in ways an angry woman sometimes doesn't. I knew that. Maybe because I am a quiet man myself. Maybe because I had watched those stories gather around me one careful sentence at a time. Still, I agreed to the dinner. A part of me agreed because of Ava. A part of me agreed because I was tired of being spoken about in rooms I wasn't in. And a part of me, if I'm honest, agreed because some exhausted old instinct in me still believed that if I just stood there calmly enough, absorbed enough, endured enough, eventually the truth would become visible on its own. That instinct had cost me more than I knew. The dinner was held at the Whitmore House rooftop ballroom in Buckhead, a place with cream walls, dark wood floors, and those floor-to-soiling windows that make a city look softer than it really is. Atlanta was humid that night in the way only late spring in Georgia can be, where the air feels like it's been holding its breath all day. I parked across from valet because I didn't want anybody opening my door like this was my celebration too. I sat in the car for a full minute before going in. On the passenger seat was a small box wrapped in plain navy paper. Inside was a silver charm bracelet I had paid to have restored. It had belonged to Renee's father's late mother. One of the clasps had broken years ago, and Renee used to say she wanted to fix it one day when life settled down. Life never settled down. I had fixed it anyway. Not because I thought a bracelet could repair 15 years. Not because I thought a gift could cover rot. But because I had remembered. And because some habits of love outlive the hope that they will be noticed. When I stepped into the ballroom, the first thing I noticed was that the room was fuller than Renee had led me to believe. Not just family, people from church, 2 women from her branding studio, her cousin Derek by the AV table, our daughter in a blue dress near the dessert stand, twisting the ring on her finger the way she does when she's nervous. And Renee at the center of it all in a gold satin dress, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair, greeting people like she was hosting a fundraiser for resilience. She spotted me and smiled. There are different kinds of smiles in a marriage. There is the smile someone gives you when they know where the good mugs are kept and can finish your sentence about your mother's pound cake. There is the smile of shared history. There is the smile of desire. There is the smile of pity. And then there is the smile someone gives when they have already decided what role you will play in a room. That was the smile waiting for me across those table linens. Micah made it, she said, just loud enough for the nearest circle to hear. Y'all, let's celebrate that first. A few people laughed, not hard, not cruelly. The way good people laugh when they still think they're witnessing a harmless joke. I smiled because Ava was watching. Renee walked toward me and kissed the air near my cheek. You look nice, she said. You invited half the city, I said quietly. She took a sip of sparkling water and gave me that slight shrug. People love a long marriage story. That should have told me everything. But long marriages train you to doubt the sharpness of what you know. Ava came over and hugged me around the waist. You came early, she said. I'm on time, I told her. She gave me a look too wise for 16. In this family, that counts as early. I kissed the top of her head and handed her the wrapped box. Can you keep this somewhere safe for me till later? She raised an eyebrow. You remembered. I almost laughed at the relief and sadness mixed in those 2 words. Yeah, I said. I remembered. She slid the box behind the gift table and squeezed my hand once. Good. Dinner started 20 minutes later. Renee had planned it like an event, not a family meal. Name cards, printed menus, a floral arch behind the sweetheart table, even though neither of us had wanted anything renewed. There was a script to the evening. I could feel it before the salad course arrived. Her pastor's wife said a prayer about perseverance. One of Renee's business friends gave a toast about the beauty of staying committed through every season. My mother-in-law, Celeste, wasn't there. She'd passed 3 years earlier. Her absence sat in the room with us anyway, especially for me. She had been one of the few people who ever looked at me like she knew there was more to a man than how entertaining he was at dinner. Renee stood after the first course and touched her champagne glass with a butter knife. That sound can silence a room faster than shouting ever does. She looked radiant, composed, a woman framed by candlelight and other people's assumptions. 15 years, she said, smiling down at the room. I know some of you are probably wondering why in the world we'd throw a dinner at a time like this. Soft laughter, a few glances. Renee dipped her head in practiced humility. The truth is, she said, marriage isn't always pretty, and love isn't always easy. Sometimes loving someone means carrying more than your share and still choosing grace. A few murmurs of agreement. I felt Ava's posture stiffen beside me. Renee kept going. Those of you who know us closely know Micah has never exactly been a details man. More laughter this time. She smiled like she was protecting me while exposing me. He forgets dates. He gets quiet when he should speak. He has this gift for disappearing emotionally right when a moment matters most. She paused, let the sympathy gather, then looked at me. But for 15 years, we've tried, and tonight I wanted to honor the try. I have to tell you something true here. There is a point in humiliation where it stops feeling hot and starts feeling cold. Hot humiliation is sudden. Your face burns, your heart races, you want to defend yourself. Cold humiliation is older than that. It happens when you've lived inside somebody's version of you for so long that hearing it spoken publicly feels less like an attack and more like watching paperwork get stamped, approved, filed, circulated. That is what her speech felt like. A certified narrative. I kept my face still because Ava was beside me, because her pastor was at table 6, because my wife had invited people who knew half our story and were eager to believe the prettier half. Renee smiled toward Derek at the AV table. I made a little tribute. 15 years in pictures, some sweet, some funny, some very honest. The screen behind her lit up. Music began. Soft piano. The kind chosen to make people sentimental before they've had time to think. The first images were exactly what you'd expect. Our wedding day in Savannah. Me in a charcoal suit, Renee all white satin and certainty. A baby shower, a Christmas photo where Ava's 3 and clutching one red mitten, a beach trip, a family barbecue. Then the caption started. The man I married had a good heart. Even when he forgot what day it was, light chuckles. A photo of me standing in a kitchen with flour on my shirt, still learning the date of our anniversary. A few more laughs. I stared at the screen and realized what she had done. She had built a whole film around the character she'd been narrating for months. Not the abusive husband, not the cheating husband. Nothing dramatic enough to invite scrutiny. Just the disappointing husband, the emotionally absent husband, the one everybody feels sorry for, but nobody really respects. That is a smart kind of cruelty. Harder to fight because it looks so reasonable. The next photo was from 5 years earlier. Renee sitting at a restaurant table alone with candles in front of her, chin propped on her hand like some sad romantic comedy still frame. Caption anniversary dinner, table for one, again. Several people made that low sympathetic noise people make when they've been handed a clean villain. And then the clip played a second too long. That is all it takes sometimes. Not a thunderclap, not a confession, just 1 second too long. The still photo dissolved into raw video. Renee at the table, yes. But then the camera shook, turned, and caught the television mounted over the bar, showing the local news timestamp in the corner. May 14, 8:42 p.m. Then somebody off camera said, "Has Micah made it to St. Joseph's yet? Your daddy keeps asking for him." The room changed. Not loudly. Not at first. Just a shift. A collective inward movement. I looked over at Renee. Her smile didn't fully fall, but it tightened. Derek leaned toward the laptop. The clip ended. Piano music resumed. A new image came up. Ava at age 10 in a recital dress. Caption. He missed this one too. I felt Ava turn slowly toward the screen. Then again, the clip ran too long. You could hear my voice this time before my face appeared. "Mr. Bennett, hold still. I've got your tie." The video showed me in a hospital restroom mirror, crouched in front of Harold Bennett, my father-in-law, helping him button a shirt over the port in his chest because he wanted to look decent before one more round of chemo. He was thinner than he ever wanted to be, smiling anyway. The timestamp in the corner was the exact hour of Ava's school recital. Then Harold said to the person filming, "Tell that grandbaby of mine her daddy loves her. I told him to stay here." Ava inhaled sharply beside me. Derek moved faster at the laptop now. Too fast. The kind of fast that tells the truth even while trying to stop it. The music cut off, came back, then skipped. And in that strange silence between the piano track catching itself, I heard the same hissed voice from behind the curtain earlier. "Renee's cousin? You told me the slideshow was only supposed to make him look careless," he whispered harshly. "Not play the hospital clip." A woman at table 4 set down her glass. Somebody else said, "Hospital." Renee laughed too quickly. "Oh my goodness, Derek, can you please fix the edits?" I said, "Use the polished version." Polished. There it was, not true. Polished. Derek stammered something and clicked again. The next part of the tribute should have ended there. If he had killed the screen, maybe Renee could have survived on confusion. Bad editing. Old files. Misunderstood context. But Derek panicked. And panicked people often do the exact thing that reveals the thing they were trying to hide. He hit play instead of stop. The screen went black for one beat. Then a voice memo began. Renee's voice. Not public Renee. Not dinner host Renee. Not church lobby Renee with her careful sigh and polished pain. Private Renee. Sharper. Impatient. Use the clips where he looks late or distracted, her recorded voice said over the speakers. The whole point is that people need to understand I've been carrying this marriage by myself. If they think he's always been the one dropping the ball, nobody's gonna ask what happened to the studio money. Nobody's gonna ask why daddy's got emptied. Just make it look honest, not mean. Silence. Real silence. Not the quiet of a speech, the quiet of impact. There are moments when a room full of adults turns into the moral version of a courtroom. Nobody appointed themselves judge, but suddenly everybody understands they are present for evidence. That was one of those moments. Renee's face went colorless. "Turn it off," she snapped. Derek slammed the laptop shut. Too late. Truth doesn't become less true just because the screen goes dark. Nobody looked at me first. That's the part people don't tell you about exposure. When a lie breaks open in public, folks often look at the liar before they look at the person who was lied on. They need to see whether the face they trusted knows it's over. Renee looked around the room like she was searching for one friendly witness who might still be willing to call this a misunderstanding. She found none. Ava stood up beside me so suddenly her chair scraped the floor. "Dad." Not loudly, but in a voice I will hear in my bones for the rest of my life. "Grandpa was the reason you missed my recital." I looked at her. "There are questions from your child you hope never come in public, because truth deserves gentleness and public rooms rarely give it." "Yes," I said. Her eyes filled instantly, and Mom knew. Renee moved toward her. "Ava, sweetheart, it's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple," Ava said, backing away from her mother like the nearness itself had become confusing. "You let me think he didn't care." Nobody in that room breathed correctly after that. Renee put both hands up like she was handling fire. "I never said your father didn't care." No, she hadn't said it directly. That's the power of suggestion. The cleanest damage often comes without a single direct accusation. She had only let birthdays and missed dinners and the shape of my silence do her work for her. It might have worked too, if not for the way truth has a habit of leaving fingerprints on whatever story covers it. I still hadn't spoken more than one sentence. Partly because I was stunned. Partly because my daughter was crying. And partly because after years of defending yourself in tiny ways nobody records, there is something almost disorienting about watching the truth defend you without your help. Then Tasha stood. Tasha Bennett is Renee's older sister, 44, ICU nurse. The kind of woman who irons her scrubs and doesn't waste words where one will do. She had spent most of dinner watching quietly from the end of table 2. Her hands folded over each other, expression unreadable. When she stood, everybody noticed. Because Tasha doesn't rise for drama. She rises when she's finished allowing nonsense oxygen. She looked at Renee first, not me. "You used his silence like it was permission," she said. Renee blinked. "Tasha, please, not here." "Here is exactly where," Tasha said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She turned to the room. "Since we're screening family archives," she said, "let's be honest. Daddy's rehab fund did get emptied. But Micah didn't do that. Renee did. Trying to keep that event studio afloat after her business partner pulled out." Renee's mouth opened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know because I was the one Dad called when the therapist said insurance stopped clearing. And I know who showed up the next morning with a cashier's check and asked me not to tell anybody." She pointed at me. "Micah." A man from church lowered his head into his hand. Somebody whispered. "Lord," Tasha went on, "not one check, 6 months of them. Rehab, medications insurance wouldn't cover, transport when Daddy got too weak to drive. And before that, he paid payroll for your studio twice, so your girls wouldn't bounce checks right before Christmas." Renee stared at her sister, the way people stare at a crack spreading across glass they still want to. "Call solid." I wish I could tell you I felt victorious. I didn't. I felt tired, deeply, spiritually tired, because none of those things were things I had done to win. They were things I had done because somebody needed them done, and I was there. That is the bitter part of public vindication. The room gasps over sacrifices that felt ordinary while you were making them. Ava was crying openly now, furious tears, teenage tears, the kind that come with betrayal and self-blame all mixed together. "You told me he forgot my 11th birthday dinner because of work," she said to Renee. "You said he was always choosing work." Renee swallowed hard. "He was working all the time, Ava." I finally spoke. "I was working nights because your mom's first investor pulled out," I said quietly. "And we were behind on the mortgage. I didn't want you to know." Ava looked at me like she was trying to reorganize her childhood in real time. That is another thing lies cost. Not just trust in the present. They alter memory. They make children sort through old scenes wondering which parent's face belonged to the truth. Renee shook her head, eyes bright now, but still fighting for control. You're all acting like I invented every hard thing in this marriage. He shut down, he disappeared. He left me to explain everything alone. I nodded once, because that much was true. I did go quiet, I said. But I want everybody here to know something about that quiet. It didn't start because I stopped caring. It started because every time I tried to tell the truth about what was happening, you told me not to embarrass the family. Nobody moved. So I kept going. For years, Renee asked me to help her keep things looking okay from the outside. When the studio lost money, I was told not to tell people because it would hurt her brand. When your father got sick, I was told not to tell Ava how bad things were because she needed stability. When I missed moments, I was asked to take the blame because the real reason was too messy or too sad or too expensive looking. I looked around the room then, slowly. At some point, I stopped being a husband and became a shock absorber. That line sat in the room a long time. One of Renee's business friends looked down into her lap. Her pastor's wife pressed her lips together. Derek, who had probably never intended to become the accidental AV technician of judgment, stayed frozen behind his laptop like moving too fast might make him complicit all over again. Renee laughed once, hollow. So now I'm the villain, Tasha answered before I could. No, she said. Now you're just not the narrator anymore. I saw it hit Renee then. Not the accusations. Not even Ava's tears. The loss of authorship. Renee had spent years crafting the story. The struggling wife, the forgetful husband, the woman carrying more than her share. The dinner tonight had been designed to settle that story in public record. One polished tribute, one round of sympathetic glances, and everybody would leave repeating some version of, well, you know, Renee did all she could. But rooms have loyalties to truth. They don't advertise beforehand. And the truth had entered hers, wearing hospital timestamps and unpaid invoices and a daughter's broken face. I thought the worst was over. It wasn't. From the back of the room, Pastor Leon cleared his throat. He's a gentle man in his 60s who hates spectacle and loves exactness, a difficult combination for public ministry. He had counseled us twice during the bad year, and both times Renee did most of the talking while I stared at the carpet and told myself protecting peace was a kind of righteousness. He stood slowly. Sister Renee, he said, did you know when you asked for prayer last fall that your husband had been paying for your father's treatment? Renee didn't answer. He nodded once, and that nod held more disappointment than anger, because you asked this church to pray for strength while speaking, as though you had been abandoned in the burden. Still no answer. He didn't push harder. He didn't need to. Truth had its own gravity now. Ava sat back down suddenly like her knees couldn't carry everything she had just learned. I crouched beside her. Hey, I said softly. She looked at me with wet lashes and the kind of shame children feel when they realize they misjudged the safer parent. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to carry grown-up worry. Because I thought protecting your image of your mother mattered more than protecting my own. Because somewhere along the line I started believing love meant letting myself be misread. But what I said was, I thought I was helping. Ava cried harder at that. And because I am still her, well, father, I am a wronged husband. I reached for her hand first. Not the microphone, not the room. That was when Renee noticed the wrapped navy box near the gift table. Maybe she noticed because Ava looked toward it. Maybe because she was desperate for anything that suggested this whole thing wasn't what it looked like. She pointed at it sharply. What's that? She asked. Ava didn't answer. Renee crossed the floor in heels that suddenly sounded too loud for the softness she had tried to stage and grabbed the box. Inside that ballroom, under that floral arch in front of 60 people and one trembling daughter, my wife unwrapped her own anniversary gift. The bracelet fell into her hand, old silver, fresh clasp, polished carefully, her grandmother's piece. For the first time all night, Renee looked truly unprepared. You fixed this? She said. I stood up slowly. 3 weeks ago. She stared at it. Somewhere in the room, somebody exhaled through their nose. The tiny involuntary sound people make when irony turns painful. Because that is what sealed it, maybe even more than the voice memo. Not just that she had lied, but that she had built a public case around my indifference on the exact night I had brought proof of memory in a navy paper box. Renee's eyes moved from the bracelet to me, and I saw something I had not seen in years. Not control, not righteous hurt, not performance, just panic. Because panic is what happens when the private truth and the public script arrive at the same table. I didn't know, she said, and her voice cracked. It was such a small sentence, and maybe she meant the bracelet. Maybe she meant the video clips. Maybe she meant the fact that people would believe what they had just seen. Maybe she meant she didn't know how much truth had survived beneath my silence. I don't know. But that sentence did not move me. Because there are some things a person doesn't get to not know after 15 years. Not if they've been awake for them. I walked to the front of the room then. No speech in my pocket. No notes. No desire to make anybody clap. I just stood where she had stood and looked at all the faces we had lived among. I don't need anybody here to take my side, I said. I really don't. But I do need one thing said plainly while everybody's still in the room to hear it. I did not forget my marriage. I disappeared inside it. No one made a sound. I kept choosing quiet because I thought quiet would protect my family. I let missed moments make me look careless because the truth behind them felt too heavy to put on my daughter. I let my wife tell stories that made me smaller because I thought a good man keeps carrying things even after his back gives out. I looked at Ava then back at the room. That was not strength. That was fear dressed up as patience. I turned to Renee. And I won't do it anymore. The music was off. The city lights behind the windows looked farther away than they had an hour earlier. Renee held the bracelet in one hand and the back of a chair in the other. She looked suddenly older. Not ugly, not monstrous. Just tired in a way vanity can't hide. And for 1 second I saw the woman I had once loved in the right order. Not the public one, the private one. The one who had always been terrified of being thought ordinary, thought unstable, thought less than admired. People like that don't always choose cruelty because they enjoy it. Sometimes they choose it because image has become the only shelter they trust. That truth did not excuse her, but it kept me from hating her in that moment. She looked at me and said, almost childlike, I was trying to keep everything from falling apart. I nodded, I know. And it was true. I did know she had just mistaken control for repair. The room broke slowly after that, not dramatically, no yelling, no glasses thrown, just human distancing. One church couple collected their things and left with quiet nods. Renee's branding friends whispered to each other and slipped out without dessert. Pastor Leon came to Ava first, not either of us, and asked if she wanted one of the women from church to drive behind us later, in case she didn't want to go home alone with tension. That is the kind of practical kindness older people offer. When they know there are no wise words large enough for the moment, Tasha came and stood beside me. I'm sorry, she said. I should have spoken sooner. I shook my head. You spoke when it counted. She gave a sad little half smile. That's usually what people tell themselves while they're being cowards. I had no reply to that. Because maybe I had been telling myself my own version of the same thing for years. Ava wiped her face and looked at her mother. Did Grandpa know? Renee's face folded in on itself at that. Harold Bennett had known many things before he died. That his daughter was burning herself up trying to look successful. That his son-in-law was paying more than money. That their granddaughter deserved more honesty than either parent had given her. But what Ava meant was something deeper. Did he know Mom would let me blame Dad? Renee sat down like her legs gave out. I think he knew I was ashamed, she whispered. Ava said nothing. There is a kind of silence daughters use when they are not ready to forgive either parent but can no longer confuse them. That was the silence on her face. We left the ballroom a little after 10. Renee didn't ask me to stay. I didn't ask her to come home. Ava chose to ride with me. The drive down Peachtree was wet with the kind of reflected light that makes a city look like it's been crying just off camera. Ava sat curled toward the window, one heel kicked off, mascara gone, hands clasped tight in her lap. About 15 minutes into the drive, she said, I thought you didn't show up because you didn't want to. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, not from anger, but from grief so old it had developed layers. I know, I said. She rubbed at her face. I used to tell myself you were just bad at emotional stuff, that it wasn't personal. Then she turned and looked at me. But you were out there doing all that for us. The us in that sentence almost undid me, because that was all I had ever wanted her to understand. Not that I was perfect, not that I was right about everything, just that I had been there, even when there wasn't a camera angle that made it obvious. I should have told you more, I said. You should have told me enough, she answered. 16-year-olds will find the center of a wound and press it without even trying. Sometimes that's the most honest love in the room. When we got home, Ava went upstairs without another word. I sat in the driveway after turning off the engine and realized I had no idea what to do with my hands. For 15 years, those hands had repaired things: bathroom faucets, tuition gaps, recovery schedules, church tables before fish fries, tires, portrait frames, leaky roofs, quiet lies. My own appetite for rest. Now the one thing they had not repaired was finally out in the open, and I felt less triumphant than emptied. I went inside, loosened my tie, and stood in the kitchen at midnight, staring at the old workshop key hanging from a hook near the pantry. Before marriage, before overtime, before practical adulthood put both feet on my neck, I used to build furniture. Not fancy showroom furniture, honest stuff. Benches, shelves, dining tables that could survive children and weather and years. My father taught me in his garage in Decatur, with a fan blowing sawdust into our faces and old Luther Vandross on the radio. When Renee launched the studio, I stopped working in the shop nights because the orders were irregular and the extra money had to go elsewhere. Then Harold got sick. Then Ava got older. Then the tools started gathering dust. Then I told myself I would get back to it when life settled. Life rarely settles. It just changes the shape of what it asks. I slept badly. The next morning I found Ava already up at the kitchen island eating dry cereal out of a coffee mug. She looked like she had aged a year overnight. Mom texted, she said. I waited. She said she's sorry for how things came out. I almost smiled at the wording. Not what she did, how it came out. Ava looked at me over the rim of the mug. I don't know what to do with her right now. You don't have to know today, I said. She nodded and scraped her spoon around the bottom like she was searching for anything left. After she left for school, Tasha called. Come by Daddy's old storage unit, she said. There's something you need. I drove there around noon. The unit was out past East Point, the kind of place with chain link and faded numbers on metal roll-up doors. Harold had rented it after Celeste died, when he couldn't bear to decide what to keep and what to give away. I had been there once, years ago, helping him move 2 rocking chairs and a cedar chest. Tasha was waiting outside Unit 118 in navy scrubs and sneakers, arms folded. Inside smelled like paper cedar and old Georgia heat. Boxes, a cane, frame records, a fishing tackle case, 3 shelves of labeled bins. Harold Bennett had been one of those men who kept receipts, handwritten manuals, neatly wound extension cords. A man who believed preparedness was a form of love. Tasha reached into her tote and pulled out a long white envelope with my name written across it in blocky black ink. Micah, if she ever confuses your silence for emptiness, open this. My hands went numb. That's his handwriting, I said, though obviously it was. Tasha nodded. He gave it to me 6 months before he passed. Told me not to hand it to you unless the day came, when the whole family needed help seeing you clearly. I stared at the envelope. Why didn't you tell me? Because I kept hoping the day wouldn't come. Fair enough. I opened it carefully. Inside was a folded letter and 1 photograph. The photo hit me first. It was me in Harold's backyard 7 summers earlier, shirt damp with sweat, sleeves rolled up, building him a raised planter box, because chemo had taken enough strength from his back that kneeling in the garden hurt too much. Harold was in a lawn chair behind me, smiling like he knew he'd gotten away with something. On the back, in Harold's handwriting, a man who loves you in work clothes is a man worth listening to. I read the letter next. Micah, if you are holding this, then either I was more right than I wanted to be, or life got to my daughter in the places she was always trying hardest to hide. I need you to know 3 things. First, I saw you, not just when you wrote checks, not just when you drove me to treatments. I saw you when nobody thanked you. I saw you cancel your own plans so my granddaughter never had to feel the floor move under her feet. I saw you sit in hospital parking lots longer than necessary because you wanted to walk into the house calm. Second, shame makes fools out of good people. My daughter learned young that appearances could buy mercy. Somewhere along the line she began trusting admiration more than honesty. That is not your failure. Do not spend the back half of your life paying for a wound you did not make. Third, go back to your hands. If this family ever makes you forget who you were before survival, go back to wood and measure and steadiness. Build something that stays square because it was cut true the first time. You have been a better husband than people knew, and a better man than some deserved. Don't disappear just because disappearing became useful to others. Harold. I had to read the last paragraph twice because my eyes stopped cooperating. Tasha stood a few feet away, pretending to reorganize a box of Christmas ornaments so I could have dignity in private. I loved her for that. I kept thinking I should have defended you years ago, she said after a while. Then I'd remember Daddy saying you hated scenes. I laughed once through my nose. He wasn't wrong. He also said being scene-averse is a terrible quality in a man married to a gifted storyteller. That made me smile for real. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. What happened after we left last night? I asked. Tasha leaned against the storage frame. Renee stayed in that ballroom almost an hour, mostly alone. Pastor Leon prayed with her. She called me at midnight crying, said she didn't mean for the voice memo to play. I looked at her. Tasha gave me a dry look back. I know. That's not exactly the part she needed to be sorry for. I nodded. Then she added, Micah, shame is probably chewing her alive today. But don't let that pull you back into protecting her from the consequences. That sentence mattered. Because when you have spent years cushioning another person's fall, their pain can trigger old reflexes faster than your own memory can intervene. I drove home with Harold's letter on the passenger seat and the workshop key in my pocket. That afternoon, for the first time in almost 4 years, I unlocked the side garage. Dust, heat, stacked boards, a miter saw under a canvas sheet, clamps hanging where I had left them like patient accusations. There are places in your own life that feel like witnesses. That workshop was one of mine, not judging. Just waiting, I turned on the overhead light. Then another. I ran my palm over the workbench and came away gray with dust. Ava found me there an hour later, still standing, not yet building, just remembering where everything belonged. She stepped inside slowly. I forgot this place existed. Me too, I said. She picked up a measuring tape and pulled the yellow strip out a foot, then let it snap back in. Grandpa used to sit right there. She pointed to the stool in the corner. Yeah, we stood quietly. Then she said, can you teach me? That almost broke me more than the ballroom had. Teach you what? She looked around. Whatever you were before all this. I turned away under the pretense of reaching for a rag because sometimes love from your child comes disguised as a request, and if you answer too fast, your face tells everything. Yeah, I said finally, I can do that. So we started simple cleaning first, sweeping, sorting screws, wiping tools, explaining what a square is and why being off by even a little at the beginning means fighting the whole project by the end. Ava smiled at that. That sounds less like carpentry and more like a life lecture. It's both, I said. For the next 3 Saturdays, we worked in that garage. Word spread in the family the way truth always does. After it's finally allowed to travel without supervision. My mother brought sweet tea and said nothing foolish like I told you so. Tasha came once with sandwiches and a bag of old hardware Harold had saved for no good reason, which of course turned out to be exactly the right reason. Pastor Leon stopped by with a church deacon who needed a bench repaired and had enough wisdom not to mention the anniversary dinner at all. Renee texted, called twice, wrote a long email, asked if we could talk with a counselor, asked if I'd consider meeting somewhere private. Her messages were more honest than I had heard her be in years. But honesty after collapse has a different shape than honesty before it, and I wasn't ready to reward timing mistaken for transformation. So I kept my answers brief. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just not ready. That was the most truthful boundary I had ever set with her. Ava began splitting her time carefully between us, which hurt her and helped her all at once. Some evenings she came home from Renee's apartment quiet and angry. Other evenings she came back softer, having seen her mother without the armor of an audience. I didn't ask too much. Children shouldn't be turned into interpreters between the people who made them. One Sunday afternoon, about a month after the dinner, Ava and I finished a cedar planter box almost identical to the one in Harold's photograph. Same dimensions, same depth, same simple trim. Her cuts were shaky in spots, screws a little misaligned, but the thing stood solid when we set it down. She stepped back, sawdust on her cheek, and said, "It's not perfect." I looked at her and thought about polished slideshows and clean lies and years of mistaking appearance for truth. "It doesn't have to be polished," I said. "It just has to hold weight." She smiled slowly. That evening, after she went in to wash up, I sat alone in the garage with Harold's letter again. Do not spend the back half of your life paying for a wound you did not make. There are sentences that arrive like permission. That was one. I don't know yet what the final shape of my marriage will be. Some stories want a neater ending than life has the courtesy to provide. Maybe by the time you hear this, papers will be signed. Maybe forgiveness will exist without reunion. Maybe Renee will become somebody truer than the woman who needed a room full of witnesses to feel safe. I actually hope she does. For Ava's sake. For her own. But I do know this: the night she tried to prove I had forgotten what mattered was the night everybody finally saw what I had remembered all along. I remembered her father's appointments. I remembered our mortgage due dates. I remembered payroll when her staff had children depending on those checks. I remembered our daughter's favorite soup when she had strep. I remembered which church widow needed her porch rail tightened before rain. I remembered the bracelet. I remembered love. What I forgot, what I let myself forget, was that love without truth eventually starts eating the person offering it. If you have ever spent years being the quiet one in a loud story, hear me clearly. Silence does not always make you noble. Sometimes it just makes you easy to edit. And if there is some honest part of you packed away in a garage, a closet, a shed, a notebook, a song file, a tackle box, a sewing drawer, a stack of canvases, a workbench under dust, do not wait for humiliation to send you back there. Go back now, before somebody else's version of you gets too comfortable, before your child learns the wrong lesson about what devotion looks like, before you wake up one day and realize you have been present for everybody's life, but absent from your own. Last week, Ava and I delivered that planter box to Tasha's porch. She ran her hand over the edge and said, "Daddy would love this." Ava smiled and said, "Grandpa already did. He just had to wait a little." Tasha looked at me then, and in her face I saw the kind of family truth that no dinner, no church whisper, no polished performance can permanently bury. A man can be misunderstood for a long time. He can even help build the misunderstanding if he thinks it keeps other people safe. But sooner or later, what he carried shows up somewhere. In a timestamp, in a hospital hallway, in a daughter's question, in a dead man's letter, in the dust on an old workbench waiting to become proof. So if this story found you at the right time, take one honest hour this week and return to the version of yourself that never needed applause to be real. Open the shop.